Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar from the MRSI, sharing the details of how to implement the new SEC system, socioeconomic system, ISEC. Next slide. The panel of experts who are very kindly taking the fraternity through the implementation are Parijat Chakraborty, who's India lead, public affairs, corporate regulation, ESG, and CSR for Ipsos. Prashant Kolleri, leader, consumer insight, South Asia, NielsenIQ. And Siddhartha Banerjee Sid, who's director, face-to-face and CATI data acquisition for South Asia, Kantar. Handing over to Prashant now.
Thank you. Thanks, Mitali. Very good afternoon to everyone. I guess you all would have witnessed the official launch of ISEC, which happened some time ago. And the fact that it actually received so much of acceptance and excitement from various stakeholders, whether it is research practitioners like us, or whether it is clients, or even agency experts in other domains like advertising and media. For us as an industry, this actually is a very significant milestone. We know the country is moving very, very fast and rapidly evolving, both in terms of economic growth and also in terms of social growth. So when that is happening, it's also imperative that us as an industry actually keeps pace in terms of developing a forward-looking construct for as important a currency as socioeconomic classification. And that's what today is all about. So in this webinar, myself and my industry colleagues, Parijat and Sid, we will take you through the fundamental construct of ISEC, the new socioeconomic classification, and more importantly, the implementation aspect of it. I hope you all will enjoy the webinar and learn a lot from it, and we progress to the details of that. So going to the next slide, I touched upon the changing landscape of India, the fact that the country is moving quite fast in terms of economic and social change. And I think everyone is witness to this, the fact that in the last 5 to 7 years, there has been a significant shift in terms of development in utility-driven aspects of the country, and also the social aspect of it. And some of these things have actually a far-reaching implication when it comes to consumerism or consumption as a whole. So, for example, the buildup of electricity access to wider households across India basically means aspirations to own actually consumer durables or electronic durables in that sense. Similarly, when it comes to cooking fuel or LPG gases availability, basically means that consumption of food and beverage in the packaged manner becomes actually a growth factor for wider sections of society. So when these kind of changes are happening, I think coupled with the fact that you also have seen big shift in availability of credit, whether it is zero EMI, easy finance over the last 10 to 15 years, it basically means that access to living standards and consumer durables and everything that makes life better becomes much faster for a wider section of society. And there are massive overlaps between social strata across the band. And that is the reason why I think we are at this point where we are moving forward in terms of coming up with a new socioeconomic classification system. Next slide. Yeah. We are all familiar with NCCS, which was based on education of chief wage ownership or owner and of the owner and the ownership of durables itself. And we had a primary list of about 10 to 11 durables, which had the very, very basic on one end and to the slightly higher end and the expensive aspect of it. Now, like I mentioned, with the shift in finance access and the fact that there is zero EMI and the way consumers have moved forward in aspirations, ownership of these durables have actually become a common thing. So two key implications that came out, and it is going to happen going forward also, is some bit of instability in terms of how we classify people based on durable ownership. That is not going to be rigid. it can shift very, very fast. And with retail access actually expanding across the country very fast, you will see these changes happening even more than what has happened in the last 8 to 10 years. And the other aspect is our ability to discriminate between different levels of socioeconomic classification purely basis outcome variables like ownership of durable. So in that sense, we need something which is a little bit more solid, a bit more longevity driven, and a far more discriminating in today's market, and which can actually live for a little longer as well. So, and that is the premise of developing the new socioeconomic classification system. Next slide. Yeah. So there were, when we built the construct and the expert team looked at it, there were four fundamental pillars in which it had to actually stand strong. One is about stability, because we should not be having to have frequent updates in the world where there is so much of dynamism, both from a social and economic context. We also need something which is very discriminating, because then that becomes targetability much more solid and much more impactful, both for marketeers, media, and everybody in the economic and business zone. From a simplicity point of view, it has to be very simple and clear and easy to understand. In fact, something which cuts across from an application perspective. And more importantly, ours is a very heterogeneous market from an urbanization context, from a cultural context. I mean, it's such a big country. We need a definition which can be adaptable and live across the total nation. And we are all proud that what we have here is actually something which is delivering very well on all of these four parameters. Going to the next slide. Just wanted to reflect back on the robustness of the journey when it was developed. So when the experts worked on this, they started with what could define as surrogate variables for affluence, and there was a longer list on that. And using that surrogate list and looking at some of the available materials, especially on things like NCAER, you get a sense of what variables matter more when it comes to affluence and propensity to consume or affordability. And one can't straight jump into an outcome of what could be a new system, because there is a journey and iteration that somebody has to go through. The expert working team actually built system based on multiple variables, from a extreme of one single variable, which could be the most desirable outcome, to having a combination of 3 to 4 variables or even more. And not just straightforward, just education, but also building on some of the learnings from NCCS, including durable ownership and so on. These systems were actually stress tested very well, both in terms of stability and discrimination. It was also looked at very closely in terms of if we were to actually do a validation on existing large-scale work, whether it is IRS, which is in 2019 as a last read, or the World Panel data, will it actually stand its ground in terms of those parameters of stability and discrimination? So those were also done. And of course, not to mention very strong statistical rigor in understanding which of the combination of variables actually makes sense in terms of defining the new ISEC. So in short, it's taken some long time and a lot of work in terms of understanding whether it can stand ground or not before coming to the final outcome of what is defined as a new SEC construct. If you look at the next slide, so here is of course the proof of the pudding and the final outcome. I mentioned about simplicity. We have 3 core fundamental questions which actually defines the new socioeconomic classification. The first one is, or rather one of them is the chief wage earner's occupation, which is a concept which everybody is familiar with from the past. And then we have the education of the highest educated male adult. So we are bringing in a lot more emphasis on to the education aspect of it. And most importantly, education of the highest educated female adult in the household. So few things do come out when you look at this construct itself. One, it is very, very simple. Second, we are capturing the status of the household from a multiple member concept. So 2 to 3 individuals in the household. So it's holistic. It's a household unique classification. So it brings the full picture in that sense. And more importantly, compared to a durable ownership, which is an outcome aspect, this is more from a potential and forward-looking part of it. So that's also very, very critical. So it can stand ground going forward for several years. And last but not the least, the fact that we have the highest educated female adult as one of the key definers of socioeconomic classification means we truly have captured social capital. There is enough research and work that is done across several markets, and you see the interlinkages between education of female, how that evolves and how that links to economic growth and overall propensity to consume. And we believe that this variable is actually going to play a critical role going forward. And in a good essence, we've actually captured what is required from an India perspective, and that makes it extremely powerful and to a large extent even a good game changer as far as defining socioeconomic class is concerned. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah, thanks. I want to spend a bit more time on this. We talked about the fact that NCCS system held its relevance, a decade or two back, and it ran through it for a long time. And in the recent context, the fact that there is so much of accessibility to consumerism and strength of utility access for wider household and society, as you saw in the previous slides, and that reflects here. In the mapping of NCCS and ISEC onto the IRS, which is a large establishment survey, which was done sometime back, you can see the contrast in a very clear fashion. On the left-hand side, we get a sense of how does NCCS map out in terms of the division of the POP strata for an all-India level, and practically purely from an intuition and understanding of the market point of view, we all know that socioeconomic class A, B, and C cannot define most of the country. There has to be a fair amount of what is called a socioeconomic class D and E also. And applying the ISEC, the 3-question framework that you saw in the past, you get a much more, let's say, tuned to the market kind of pyramid structure, where the top section of the society, if you might to call higher class, that's about 11% odd. The top 2 is about 25% odd. And there is still a bottom of the pyramid in that sense, which are 25 to 25% each, if you go down from ISEC 11 and 12 perspective. So it gives a clear sense of how the market stacks up today when it comes to propensity to consume and affordability from a socioeconomic classification. And that is the reason that we're actually moving forward, and I see the market is also responding very well in terms of the launch of the new ISEC. Yep. I would now like to hand over to my industry colleagues. So Parijat will take over from here, focusing more on the details of the implementation aspect before handing over to Sid. Over to you, Parijat. Yeah.
Thanks, Prashant. Hello, everybody. Before I start, just a reminder that you have a Q&A box. So anybody has any question during the course of this presentation discussion, please feel free to share your question, thoughts, ideas, anything like that. You won't have to wait for the end of the session. Okay, so Sid and I will be talking about how we propose to implement the ISEC. I'll talk more about how from the researchers angle, what the researchers and the typical CS people and the users have to really know, take care, and the true blue implementation on the ground that Sid will talk about. Okay, so as we move to the next slide, and I'm move to the next slide, please. Seems to be lagged, a bit of lag. You would have seen it, but nevertheless, it's always better to recall the exact questions that we are asking after all these years of analysis which has gone into. This is the exact way the questions are asked or to be asked. So what is the occupation of the person who contributes the most to the running of your household? Pretty much similar to what we have seen it earlier. Even an old SEC had it that way. So typically the CWE, occupation of the CWE, and if they're retired and unemployed, then what was prior to that, what was the work that the person was involved into. The interesting part this time around is about the education. It is no more CWE's education. It is the both for male as well as the female members, adult, that is 21 years. Please keep that in mind. It is not 18 years, because in many contexts we use 18 years as the adult, but in this case it is 21. And both for the adult men and adult female, what is the maximum that that person has studied in that household? Obviously there could be a situation where there is nobody adult, male or female in that household. Yeah, so be it. We have provisions for all those kind of different combinations in our grid. So we'll, in the next slide, I'll take you through how to look at these different responses, both education as well as the occupation part of it. And it's a bit cluttered, but bear with me. You already have it in MRSI website, so that's why we took the liberty of having it one slides, because you can always go there and go through these details in a very uncluttered manner. So please do that. But right now, let me take you through that how this dynamic context of occupation and education that we have addressed in this. First, to talk about the occupation part of it. This is this classical 6 buckets of occupation that we typically see happening in any country for that matter. And so somebody who doesn't have any skill and is doing a daily wages job, laborers. Then getting into the farmers, which is more relevant for rural, you can say, but some part of these farmers, which are not necessarily on the land or the agricultural farmer, can be relevant in some urban and semi-urban areas as well. And as you know, that this ISEC as the classification is equally applicable for rural and urban. So we don't have 2 different sets to manage anymore. Because of that, this farmer is pretty much there as a part of even your urban related studies. The workers are the ones which are somebody who has got some skills. And we have a long detailed definition of who covers or who comes under which part of it. The interesting part is the trader, stroke businessman, stroke shop owners, and so these are the typically people who are running some small, very medium shops and all. And also it includes people who are running a business, not necessarily a shop, and employing people. So business, you can call them industrialists also in a smaller scale, and up to 9 employees. Right. So that also gets covered there. Then the clerical supervisory stuff, and then gets into the managerial and professional. Some of these are very common, had been there in this industry. We have been using it for ages. So for some of those, my colleagues in this call who are familiar with that, pardon me for getting into so much details, because there are some colleagues on this call who are not so familiar about it. Yeah, but I'm sure after they also start adopting this, things will be very clear about it. And we also have for urban and rural very micro level classification, and those color codes. I don't know whether you were able to see that. The objective is not for you to read and understand at this stage. You can always do that at your leisure time and go through that. But here to basically tell you that the urban and rural occupations have been broken down into very micro level for a guidance, that if this is what the person is doing in urban or in rural, how I'm going to classify that person into. So please do read that. You may decide to script it, you may decide not to script it. Both are okay. But yeah, the scripting it in is always a better thing to do. And that will be foolproof, not left on individuals. About the education, it remains the same. It is not very different from what we have seen. As we move to the next couple of slides, we'll take you through more about defining these occupations and education. So let's go to the next slide and let's understand how the laborers are. These are typically the people who doesn't have a skill and it can be somebody who's the construction worker to household help, or somebody is doing some food service related stuff, garbage recycling collector. So anybody who has not got any specific training or any purpose, any skill that has not been given to that person, and the person has not learned that way, it's like that he or she might have got some specialization by repeatedly doing something, but it's not a specialized skill that the person has. So it's a daily wager. We have this definition rather understood. Confusion at times it happens with the worker. We'll come to that sometime. In between, there's a farmer, which is the one who earns from an farm. That farm can be an agricultural farm. It may be that the person owning it. It may be that the person is leasing it, because in India there's a lot of lease farming which are very prominent, or even sharecrops that together jointly they're doing. Some is giving some investing money, some is doing more of managing, and so on. So there could be many different ways people are earning from a firm, and that firm can be an agriculture, or it can be, you can call it a business also, that around the poultry or fishery, dairy products, livestock, and like that. So all those are part of the farmer categories. Moving to the workers, these are the people who are rightfully employed, but by someone else, and it's not self-employed people. So a laborer who may be working in multiple places, and at times maybe with somebody, working with somebody, at times with somebody else, then that person is not a worker. But if it is a person who has been working and is employed by somebody, it's a worker. And typically these people have some specialized skill, like it can be a mechanic, it can be a technician, or a cook for that matter, or any of those special skill that the person has acquired over a period of time. Some of these people may be freelancing, if I may use that word, like in our industry, that's quite a common word. And some of these people may be working with some entity, maybe with a society, maybe with some other entity and all. And depending on that, the classification will change. My colleague Sid will take you through more in such cases, how a similar kind of a occupation, but how the entity that is engaging them, and obviously that kind of source of the money, the education, and how all these can impact the classification, though apparently looks like very similar. So Sid will spend some time on that. So as we move on to the other three rather higher classifications of the occupations that we had, start with the shopkeepers, or even the small-scale businessman, industrialist. So this is a person who generally owns a particular, or owns or runs even a particular business. Now, that business can be a small business, even a kela, or it can be really an establishment where the person is running a salon or running a shop, where employing a few people, some workers are employed there. So it may so happen that the person who is the salon owner himself doing the same work, but the way the profile of these two people, that somebody who is owning that business and working, somebody who is employed in that business and working, they will have two different kind of classifications. So it's important to know what is the engagement level, what is the source of the funds for them, and it includes the business owners or the industrialist up to a employment of 9 employees. So a lot of those individuals as well as people who engage others in their small business come under it. So that means if I'm talking about a seamless progression of an industrialist or a business owner with say 5 employees gets here, if it is 15 employees, if it is 10 employees, if it is 10,000 employees, then where does it go? So that is where the moment it is crossing this 10 plus, employees engaging, that gets into a different segment altogether. And if I may take you to the extreme right of the slide, that is where the managerial or the professional category comes in, and it gets covered under that, because that is where we see that people who are running businesses like that, they're a different client. They have a different way of looking at the entire, the usage, behavior, characteristics, and everything. So the difference between this managerial and the clerical, or the middle one, is that both are employed, but the clerical and sales or the supervisory people, they are typically in the junior to mid level, and they require instructions by their manager, leaders, and like that. While the managerial levels, the highest level here, is where they're having higher order responsibilities in the organization. So managerial, decision making, leadership roles, and all. It could be the heading the department or some important role within that department. And it could be the self-employed professionals as well. So the entire client, lawyers, singers, and everybody comes into this segment. So that's the broad 6 classifications. It had always been a tough thing that there are so many thousands of occupations. How can they be clubbed meaningfully so that they are rather homogeneous within themselves and heterogeneous across? It is a big challenge, research challenge, statistical challenge, and all. And then finally, these 6 segments have been arrived on, where we found the maximum suitability in this. So more details on that is there on our website, and we'll be sharing for further more guidelines on this. As we move on, we'll get into the look into the education groups that we have. There are 6 of those again. Here, obviously, somebody who is no formal education, illiterate, or maybe there is some literacy, but there is no as such school exam, continues the same classification continues earlier others of then up to 5th, 6 to 9, that's understood. 10 to 14, let me spend a few seconds here, because 14 there is as such there is no class for that matter. 10, 11, and after that we graduate to a college and all like that. So people who have spent a couple of years in a college but not graduated, they are the ones typically on this 14. Or there are parallel vocational courses, diploma, certificates, which are after 12th, but it's not a degree course. So to incorporate all those kind of courses and all those kind of education, so it is 10 to 14 as the bracket it is looked at. The degree, regular and professional, please have a note on that. The classification is not on whether it's a graduate or a postgraduate. The classification is more of, is it a general stream or is it a professional stream? And that's why you will find that BA, MA, BCom, MCom, all these are clubbed together, while the B, BTechs, MTechs, CA, etc. are as a part of the professional part of it. So that's the way we have seen there are more heterogeneities across and more homogeneities within, and that's why they are classified it this way. PhD is an interesting one, that if somebody has done PhD, that means it's a higher education beyond masters, be it in regular streams or a professional stream. You can do a PhD in literature, you can do a PhD in a high-end technical engineering topic as well, right? So either way, it is on the degree professional side. So that way the broad description of the classification. Further details we'll get in our website. And as we move on, how, when we are asking those questions, how are we going to, code it in our the grid that you can see on the screen. You may be familiar with the earlier ISEC grid, which was relatively simple. On one side you have the education, the other side you have the. And now you have one more factor. So first grouping is done by the occupation. Within that, the factors which are the highest male education and female education are put in a matrix way. So you will find that these heads of highest female adult education, and on the row the male adult education, highest education. This grid is same for all the 6 occupation categories, but depending on which occupation category and the combination of the male and female highest education, you will find the codes are changing, and the codes hovering from 12 going up to 1. The 12 is the lowest, the base of the pyramid. 1 is at the top of the pyramid. And you can see that within a occupational segment, be it worker, be it trader, be it laborer, there's a wide difference if the education thing is changing. So within a category in one corner where no education, you will find that it may be hovering around 12 or 11 as the code, while on the other extreme diagonal opposite corner within the same occupation category, you may find that 1, 2, or 5 or something like that. So what it essentially means that this system captures the outlook of the household as it changes with the education of both male and female adults within that. And that's why within the same occupation band you will see such a wide variety of classification changing. And as you see that the more we are going on the right hand side within that grid, that means the female education is increasing. You can see that it's the classifications are changing from 12 to 11 to 10 to 9 and like that. And also the downward side, that means the male education is increasing. So within a column, if you go down, you will see the groups are changing. So that essentially tells you that this grid right now is capable of encompassing pretty much every kinds of combinations that we have in the country in terms of different occupations and the different education bands that we have. The next challenge for us would be that when we go and interview and where there are this kind of different scenarios appearing, how we are going to code it here particularly. And my colleague Sid will take you through the details on that. And yeah, I hand over to you, Sid.
Yeah, thank you, Parijat. Thanks, Prashant and Nitali also for setting the context up. On ground, this is something which is not very different. We have been doing this. So when we had SSC, we were actually capturing, as Parijat mentioned, that we were capturing occupation and education of the chief wage earner. Yeah, the only thing that is now coming up is it is becoming a little bit of a 3-dimensional thing where you are actually looking at the occupation, then you're looking at the highest educated male and the highest educated females of education. So basically, to handle it on the ground, and when the industry works with freelancers for collecting the data, I think a significant amount of time needs to be invested in training the freelancers on the grid, and that will help us in capturing the right classification. Obviously, if you go to the website, you will see that there is an exhaustive documentation that has been done, and that needs to be provided to everybody so that they can use it as a reference material, and whenever they have any kind of a confusion, they can always look into it and they can take a decision as to how do we capture it. But stating that, however exhaustive you make it, it's always that there will be certain unique situations might come up, and that might need a discussion, and that might need a so we need to be open to that and discuss it, and then whatever the learning that we have, we pass it on to everybody in the team so that everybody is aligned to it. Going forward, I'll just take up a few examples, a few cases, which will help us understand this grade better. Now, the first case that I'm trying to see is that Parijat mentioned that that it depends on the skill set of the acquired skill set of the chief examiner. So I've taken an example of a security guard. Now, a security guard at a retail outlet who is unarmed is something which we classify as a labor. Now, the education of the best educated male adult is 10th fail, and the education of the best educated female adult is after 12th, she has done a diploma in nursing. So if you look at it from the grade part of it, so your classification as a retail outlet unarmed is labor, which is in the first part of it. And then as you move on, you see that you are first looking at a class 6 to 9 for the male adult, because he is a 10th fail, so that is something which will get into class 6 to 9. And a diploma in nursing after 12th will be something which will be a class 10 to 12. So the coding is coming to as a 10. So the ISEC is coming as 10. Similarly, moving ahead, if you look at a security guard at a bank and he has acquired the skill of operating arms, so he is an armed worker. So he gets into the worker classification. So the same kind of a work, but just because of the acquired skill, it moves into a different occupation category. So it moves on to worker. And with the same education, we have kept the same education as an example. We have kept the same education for the best educated male and the best educated female. The classification moves on to 9. So that is how, and that is how the whole classification and the discrimination, that is something which is coming up, where a small change of skill set and from a labor to worker leads to a change in the classification. Let us take another case and moving on. This is something which is, I have kept it more keeping the urban A in mind. So basically, somebody who is owning a property and the income is something is coming in from the rent, and he's the highest contributor. So when you look at somebody who is owning a property and has given it out on rent, as per the classification, he is a trader. And when the education of the educated male adult is a BTech, and education of the best educated female adult is masters in economics. So basically, if you look at it, so he becomes a trader. A BTech profit as an education for the best educated male adult will be something which is a degree professional, whereas masters in economics will be a degree regular. So that is coming in for the female adult, and this is coming in for the A. And with the classification of occupation as a trader, we get into a socioeconomic ISEC A of 2. So that's one of another example which I thought that it's something which is going to showcase very clearly that how the education part of it works and how we can define a trader even when somebody is owning a property and giving it on rent. The other part which I've looked into is somebody who is looking into a delivery person, which is now becoming so common with e-commerce growing. So a delivery person who is basically using a vehicle to deliver and is working with any of the e-commerce platform. And just because he has acquired the set of driving a vehicle, he becomes a worker. Okay, so basically, if you are looking at it, and the education of the best educated male adult is a 12th fail, and in his household there is no female adult, so basically the classification will come as 10, where your occupation classification is a worker, and then the best educated male adult is 12th fail, so he will be in the segment of class 10 to 14. And then the classification is coming as 10 because there is no female adult which is getting into the first column of it. So that's the other way of looking at a classification. That is how it is going to be working. Now, looking at some cases in rural. So the first one is a simple one, owns land and a livestock. So going by the definition, he is going to be classified as farmer when it comes to the occupation part of it. The best educated male adult is a class 4 pass, and the education of the best educated female adult is can read and write, but no formal education has been given. So if I have to look at it, it is a classification that is coming as a farmer. Now the education of the best educated female adult is something which is no formal education, and then the education of the best educated male adult is coming as up to class 5. So when you look at the grid, it is something which is going to come as a classification of 12. Look at a bit different one, which can also come up. The CWB owns a poultry, plus he is a school teacher in the same village. And then a second level of probing that comes up as to which is the where from he is having the more income, and where from that income becomes a part of his contribution to the household expenditure. So here in this case, we have looked into that, although he owns a poultry, but his majority of the income that comes in is from the being a school teacher, and he is contributing he's contributing that from that income, he's contributing it for the household expenditure. So the moment you look at that, and moment the person becomes a teacher, if you go by the classification, it becomes a clerical classification. So when you look at, and so the chief journalist occupation becomes a clerical, and then the education of the best educated male is a BA, so which is basically a degree regular, and female adult is 12th pass, so which will fall into class 10 to 14, and we get a ISEC classification of 6. So obviously these are some things which are going to be, when you're looking at on the slides, it might look a bit of a confusing kind of a stuff, but it is something which is going to be done in the script, and obviously that is something where the classification will be coming in a much more manner. Now coming to the next slide, where I've tried to capture, which Parijat mentioned, that some of the work profile, but a different classification depending on the source of income. So let us look at a religious preacher or priest, and the priest is working with the temple trusts. So in that case, the person becomes a worker because he has acquired the skill set of doing the preaching part of it. So he becomes a worker, but his source of income is temple trust, so he's kind of employed to the temple trust and he becomes a worker. Whereas a religious preacher or a priest who is independent and he's doing it independent, he becomes a self-employed professional, and that is where he's classified into the managerial and professional category of the occupation. Similarly, a tailor who is working at a boutique is somebody who is a worker because he has that acquired skill of making those clothes, but the moment he sets up his own small kiosk and he's no more employed with the boutique, the same tailor becomes a trader. So, and that is as a classification of trader, because he's not being employed by anybody, he's kind of self-employed, but he has a small kiosk and he's looking at it and he's doing that, so he becomes a trader. The other example that I've taken is a singer at a restaurant. Now, if he is doing it as independently and he's not employed by any, he becomes again a self-employed professional and he will be treated as a professional. Whereas a singer at a restaurant employed by that restaurant, now just because he has acquired the skill set of singing, he will become a worker. So that is how it's all similar work profile, but a different classification depending on the source of income. So as you see, there is a bit of a additional probing that needs to be done, and that is the training that we need to be giving to the freelancers in getting the exact details as to how, what, where, and then classifying it in the right fashion. Now, this is something which was there earlier also. So there are freelancers who have been working in this industry for quite some time. It is not something which is going to be very new to them. It's just that they need to be doing a refresh. And obviously there will be a lot of freelancers who has come into the industry when NCCS was there. So they need to be trained up into this particular of occupation. Education has always been there. So that is again a refresher kind of a. So that's it from my end. Over to you, Prashant, for the questions.
Thank you, Sid, and thanks Parijat for taking through the construct, and Sid for showing all the scenarios and examples. We've been getting a lot of questions, so I'll pick up a few, considering we have about 8-10 minutes to cover for that. Some of these questions have also kind of got addressed as Sid was talking through them, but I'll still direct them to Sid if for double clarity if that's required. So let me just take up some of the questions from what I've got through the webinar. So there is a question here. There'll be a lot of women who are highly educated, but not necessarily contributing to the expenses or to the earning. How will capturing their education help us? Maybe I'll pick up this one from a construct perspective. As we explained in the initial phase of the webinar, education of female helps us from an influencer and social capital perspective, and the fact that having a educated person at home from a female point of view has a lot of role when it comes to purchase and decision making, and thereby contributing to the propensity aspect or potential aspect of brand and marketing target. So hence the reason for using that as a key variable. There is a question from Parijita Kalyani about where will freelancers come, which category, because freelancers, one who's into design, photography, and earning well. Maybe Sid, if you could just stress on, based on the example, you could just give your view on that.
So as in one of my examples was there, like say a singer who is kind of freelancing, and he's not attached to any particular unit, is getting into a professional. So any kind of freelancing is something which is going to be treated as professional, and it is more as a self-employed professional is something that is how it is going to be classified as in the ISEC. We'll be getting into the ISEC group of 6, which is managerial and professional.
Great, thanks, Sid. We have a question here from Kumar Shubham. Sid, maybe you can explain this. What about farmers who don't own land? Where would they fall?
There is a second level of probing that will be required. So farmers who who doesn't own a land, and whether he's working as on the land as an agricultural laborer. So we have a classification of agricultural labor, and in that case, if he's working as a laborer, then we'll have to classify the person as an agricultural laborer. But if he's a farmer, but he doesn't have any work, but he's working on something, then we'll have to, because the rural classification, if you see, is pretty exhaustive, and it has tried to cover every aspects of the rural age. So we need to deep dive into what he is exactly doing, and then accordingly code that. But if he's into farming and he's working on somebody else's land, he will be treated as agricultural labor, and there is a classification for that.
Okay, good, thanks. The next question here, I guess it's more from a granularity point of view, and maybe I will touch on that. So the question is, do you have data on ISEC classification by states in India and all India? So what we showed today was the all India picture from an IRS validation point of view. I don't think we have the data for states at this point. What we are likely to get access to is more from a town class strata point of view, and maybe the zonal aspect, so which will be updated on the website in due course. That's where we are on that. A nuanced question, maybe Sid again from you, is BCA is considered degree professional. This is from Radesh. So kind of where would it kind of bucket in terms of thing? Yeah.
If BCA or Bachelor's of Computer Applications is something which I understand it. So if it is a Bachelor of Computer Application and he's getting a degree, so it is something which is going to be coming as a degree professional only.
Okay. The next I think there's this question about the classification part. Maybe Parijat, if you could help throw some light on this. We showed the 1 to 12 kind of sections of the ISEC. So the question is, will the 12 distinct classification be made available individually, or will they be clubbed into different buckets from a targeting point of view for advertisers and audience aspect?
Yeah, I'd say it will be both. To start with, as we are adopting as an industry, as a society, we are going to adopt a new system. We need these granularities of all 12 buckets. And for the product or the service that I am marketing, or for which I'm trying to do this classification for, obviously I need to understand this in a further more granularities, and for that all these 12 different granularities I'm sure we'll be needing to get into further details. But going forward, for a say advertiser or even a marketer who doesn't want to really deal with so many groups, there will be some natural grouping which will automatically happen. Maybe a advertiser, there will be a grouping of maybe top 5, top 6. The time has to come, which will be equivalent to some of the currencies which are being used in the industry today. But for a marketer, when you are targeting, not necessarily it will be in the same classification like a broadcaster is using. You may be using, depending on your category, depending on the TG, the market that you are targeting to. You may identify maybe these 3 are my core groups, and this and the remaining 3, 4, 5 maybe my other peripheral focus of this. So in nutshell, it will evolve for different product categories, different context over time, and I see it happen. To start with, all granular 12 categories will be dealing with wherever whichever is relevant, and then gradually we'll be deciding on our target groups and then making a shorter group for our convenience.
Got it. Thanks, Parijat. Yeah, there is an interesting question here on as we discuss about the importance of female education. So the question is, in the long term, the female education may not be a differentiating factor, because as education becomes easily accessible, and with government pushing so much of female education initiatives, yeah, so that's
I rather beg to differ on this presumption that everybody will be educated to a similar extent and it will become a homogeneous state, right? That is the presumption here. That has never happened for male education either. Like before the female education, government and the entire ecosystem had been putting all its weights and pressure and money and energy behind education, more focused towards male. But still there are so much of discrepancies and discriminations which are existing there. The same thing is going to continue with female as well. So you may say that the water level, the benchmark level will improve. It may so happen, hypothetically, and I wish we see that day, that in India, there is only 5% population which are below 10th pass. The rest all are above. Like, then probably 20 years, 30 years down the line, we'll have a recast of these classifications of the education. But in near future, or rather in midterm, or rather in long term, I don't think these classifications are going to go away, and each of these are going to be quite significant in its size, even if there is a concerted effort of education both for male and female.
Got it. Yeah. So I guess we're talking about, to some extent, we will of course keep a watch on this and see how it evolves, and like everything else, we need to keep pace, and that's when we may have to adapt the system as well. Yeah. Thanks, Parijat. Yeah. Yeah. So one of the other questions that came up, which maybe I'll just touch on, is, does the chief wage earner need to be the resident of the household? I mean, we know even from our general convention, from the past work, even the past systems that we've used, it doesn't have to be the case. I mean, the CWE could be, it's more an economic a contributor to the household. The person could be working anywhere else, could be abroad, and still be running the house from a financial perspective. So we kind of will follow the same, is what our stand is on that.
Just to add to that one point, when you are our concept of a household is around the kitchen, right? The people who shares the kitchen. So number of people in the household, maybe 3, but the chief wage earner may not be out of those 3. Maybe that person is living abroad or somewhere else and sending the money. So this nuance have to be kept in mind.
Yeah. So one question was the rationale. What is the rationale for 21 years versus 18 years? So it's true that, yeah, I mean, from my perspective, yes, the adult definition is 18 plus. We do have a provision that if the household doesn't have anybody in the 21-year-old plus, we will, of course, it is covered in the toolkit, it's covered in the learning documents also. We will, of course, fall back on the 18 plus, and it's there in the questionnaire as well. Yeah. I think those are the key stuff. A lot of other questions were in the, I think the gig economy and the independent professionals part, which I think Sid has already touched upon. So we won't go through that. We will, big thanks for all the questions that have come in. We will of course review them, and if something is not answered and needs a critical view in terms of ensuring that it adds to the entire training program, we'll build into the toolkit or the Q&A aspect on the website. So like we mentioned through our talk, all the materials from a implementation perspective, it's there on the MRSI page. And since we're coming to the close of the webinar, I just take a few minutes to thank the people who have been involved in this journey. First of all, big thanks to the implementation committee, and that's us here representing the team and available for further guidance and taking this forward as we go into deployment phase with many of the work that we all do in that. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. Very critical to highlight. Big thanks to the experts who actually spent several I would say man hours and man months to get us to this space, which is Ashutosh, Praveen, and Kushdesh, who worked on the system and did everything from a stress testing, validation, bringing the stats rigor to it, and then helping us arrive along with the rest of the core committee also, which is what is here. So yeah, and like Sid mentioned, and Parijat also, that we have the web page for ISEC, which covers everything that is required from a toolkit and implementation perspective. I would encourage on behalf of MRSI that you do access them, go through the guidance material, and make the most of it so that we get on to this next chapter in a very robust and confident manner. Thanks all of you for attending today's webinar. Truly appreciate you all spending time. Big thanks to MRSI and Siddhartha and Parijat for joining the session. That's it from our side. So we come to the close, and thanks again. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.